write out, I almost just started asking, who is this person who is here? Why is she here? What is he doing? What is the purpose? Almost as if I'm sort of interviewing somebody who doesn't exist, which kind of sounds strange, but I kind of get curious that way, and then that's how I come up with my answers. When I actually start to write, I do use an outline. It's easier to find, I want to know where I'm starting, where I'm going, I want to know here to here, and then I build up my chapters, and then every chapter I actually title them because it's almost like then a mini story. It tells me what this is going to be about. I write the first line, I write the last line, I write some notes in between, and the book then becomes almost like paint by number. Now I have the outline. Now I know what goes here, and what goes here, and where it goes here, and where I'm going. I know what I want to put in between, and then I just start working on those pieces.
And then it just becomes a process. I mean, not just, that's a bad word. But, you know, writing is equal parts inspiration and magic and just hard work. Just doing the work. You gotta do the do. And, you know, so part of it is kind of corralling the magic, and part of it is filling in blanks until suddenly you have 150, 200, 300, 400 pages of stuff.
I'll pause for just a second, and does anybody here have any questions for our conversation at this
point? I guess a good question would be, how do you continue? Like, how do you form the habit of writing?
How do you form the habit? Well,
I have the habit. You have to form a habit. That's a very good question. How do you form the habit? You just decide. How do you get up every day at 6 a.m. and decide you want to walk before work? How do you decide that you're going to, brush your teeth in the morning at night? How do you decide you're going to take a shower before bedtime or the first thing when you... It's a habit. And so many things, if you have the habit, you can do them. It becomes harder to break the habit. So in the beginning, that feels kind of awkward. I'm going to get up every day an hour early and I'm going to, write 1,500 words. And you get up the first day, you get up the second day, and the third day, you're like, the alarm clock, no. And then the next day, and you're like, oh, I'm not a writer. And then you just come back and you start the habit again. I actually write very little of this during the week, but I have time in the weekend carved out for that. That's very sacred. And I keep the two poles of my mind pretty much apart during the week because, to Tom's point, at the end of the workday, my mind is pretty much done. But now on Saturday, my mind is fresh. I'm going to think in other ways, and I have time carved out, and I show up every week.
there's a real famous story about Ernest Hemingway that he was committed to. His habit was to write a certain number of words every day. Now, some days it was an hour, and then he was at the bar, for the rest of the day, right? Or out gallivanting, or killing something, or fishing, or whatever. Some days it would take him all day long to find the perfect word. There's a lot of mythology about Hemingway, but you get the point, right? But to Denise's point, you just do it. You do it. Some days you're not going to be able to. There, for a lot of reasons, time, family, kids, other obligations, blah, blah, blah. But you do it. Yeah.
You said sometimes your inspiration will hit when you're on different areas. You mentioned in the shower. Do you have a waterproof laptop that you use?
I do not have a lot, but I do. Much like the old. It's kind of cliche, right? The people who keep a notepad by the side of their bed, right? Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, famous story. He woke up in the middle of a night, and who knows what the hell Keith Richards was on that night, right? But he had the riff for Satisfaction in his head, and he wrote it down, and went back to sleep. And the next morning he looked at it and went, "Ooh, what is this? This is good stuff. This is great stuff." Turns out to be perhaps the greatest rock and roll song of all time, right? I do the same thing. I've got a whole file on my computer of thoughts, lines, ideas, notions, you know. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, Ken, most of them I've never really gone back to, but in the moment, it was worth writing that. It was worth saving.
So how would you go about, well, say you're in the middle of that writing, how would you go about keeping with the ideas and not just jumping away to like different topics and different things like that?
Well, again, therein lies the challenge and the thrill of it, right? So, you know, there's another story about Bob Dylan. I'm sorry, I'm all about music, I told you, all about, you know, Bob Dylan. Somebody asked, well, how do you know if what you're writing is a song lyric, or if it's a poem, or if it's a story, or if it's a, you know, and he said, depends on the length of what I wrote. You know, if it's this, it's a lyric. If it's this, it's a, you know. That's, so you take something, I mean, I take something and kind of see where it goes. You know, and I mean, literally, there are the things that I started with one idea in mind, and call it God, whatever you want. You know, inspiration moves it in a different direction. It becomes something else. You know, that for me, that's just kind of part of the process. It's just intuitive, and I trust it. You know, and I gotta say, one of the real blessings is having a group of people, like-minded people, to then be able to bounce some of the stuff off of. And you know, sometimes when you hear it in your own head, you think, oh man, I'm just like, you know, I'm just like God's gift, right? Then you read it out loud to a group of people who are also very talented and hear it differently and go, maybe that wasn't quite so much. So there is some, I mean, that's part of the value of this, you know? It's the old thing about people who say, oh, I don't need to go to church because I pray at home. No. You can pray at home. That's not the same as church. Church is being around other people, right? This is part of that process. This is part of my church, is you can be very isolated as a writer, and that's fine. Nothing worse than having to write with a team, I'm telling you, right? But part of the growth process is to then kind of share it with the world and see where it goes. And that's a big part of it.
Ideas are also like Play-Doh. You put some Play-Doh in front of a 4-year-old, and what does a 4-year-old do?
She eats it.
You can do that too, because I have to tell you, good ideas, you can just put them in the back of your mind and let them simmer since we're on a food topic. And you know, you get a good idea on Tuesday, and you can just sort of put it on there and sort of think about it for a week or two, or, you know, 4 years. But if you start to play with it, you know, well, how do I know that this should be a poem? How do I know that this should be a song lyric? How do I know this should be a story? You poke it and you twist it and you play with it a little bit, and you might reject it, and you might mix the colors together. I mean, you see a kid get in, you might taste on it. Oh, does this sound? I don't know if I like that. You know, you read it out loud, it's not flowing right. And we sometimes get so hung up on, is it good, that we forget to have fun with it. Being creative is fun. We don't have to worry about if it's good in the moment when we're playing with it. Creating is messy. I have a couple of kids who are chefs, and when they get an idea, when they're, you know, when you can make these beautiful desserts, but don't come into the kitchen when they're starting. There's flour everywhere, they're not coming out, there's maybe a few words flying because things didn't turn out, you're having to start over. But that part is not the same as the end. It gets you there. But along the way, there's all kinds of things you might stop, start, change it. Oh, I don't have enough salt. Now what do I do? Then you adjust. And so, you know, have fun with your ideas. Sometimes you might have a very clear idea where you're going to go. You know, like a box of Legos. I'm going to build this castle. I want it to look like this. And you start working at it until you come to the vision. You might be tearing down walls here and there for a while. You know, maybe the turret's a little too tall. But eventually you can get the castle to look like the one on the picture, because that's how you want it to look. Does that answer the question too?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so then, you're writing your essay, your poem, your story. How do you know it's done and ready to publish?
It's never done. It doesn't matter. You can publish it and you can pick it up. It's like, oh, I knew that sentence 4 in paragraph 15 on page 1. No! Why did I leave it like this? It's never done. At some point, it's a judgment call you make. When you read it from beginning to end, you get some opinions on it. It's really close to what you said. At some point, you're done. I mean, how do you know the spaghetti sauce is done? You've tasted it, you've added it, you've got a little more oregano here, a little more pepper here, but at some point you call it done and you say dinner is served. And you just kind of get a feel for the item. Not maybe have a big answer.
No, that's exactly true. And there have been things, in fact, just recently, there's something that I wrote several years ago, a long-form poem that when I read it back to myself, and it's in one of my books, I thought that there was a word that was bumpy, a single word. Well, I'm not going to republish the book, but I did go back on my computer and I changed it. You know, so it happens. And if I'm ever making spaghetti sauce, I just let my wife do it because she's a chef, and I ain't gonna argue with that. So I'm not going.
Can you talk a little bit about the publishing process, being a self-published author?
Yep, Denise.
Tom?
So the vision I think that we all have at some point of becoming the next whatever, Maya Angelou or Stephen King, or take your pick, right? James Patterson, and selling a gajillion books, and they're on sale at Barnes and Noble and Target and Amazon and blah blah blah. That world is less and less these days. Everything more so than it has ever been is about money. Can they sell? Do they see a way to sell your book and make a profit? And I mean, God bless American capitalism. That's what it's about. But a couple of generations ago, there were many tiny little publishers who would take a chance on a Dale Hansen. And if the book sold 5,000 copies, well, by golly, you made some money, they made some money. It was fine, right? No, it wasn't. It wasn't East of Eden. But that's okay. It wasn't supposed to be. Those opportunities have basically gone away. Now you're left with the big 5 publishers, and they're looking at film rights. Does it involve the Avengers? How can we maximize profit? Right? So little guys like us, that's a hard nut to crack. So the world has kind of shifted, and so has the respect for, or the appreciation for, self-publishing. Now, in our day, so within the last 20, 30 years, oh my God, you self-publishing, vanity publishing. I mean, that was like, calling you by a bad name because you were paying somebody to publish your stuff. That has changed. The process now is so much more open. And I mean, whatever you think about Amazon, I'm going to tell you, thank God for Amazon, at least in this context. Because not only did they create a place to sell everything, for people like us, they created a place to create as well. Okay? You can use free tools. Now, there are some costs involved with buying the ISBN numbers and things like that, but you can use free tools to create and publish a book that people can then buy. Right there next to James Patterson. Okay? And you're going to make more money doing that than you would if you hired an agent who then had to go shop your book around, hope they could find somebody who's willing to buy it, Now, I will tell you that my first book, Chocolate Cows, I went through, now this is independently published, but I used a company that I did pay. I paid them to do all of this for me. part of what I paid for is for them to get it on a shelf at Barnes and Noble. You have to pay for that. Anybody know how grocery stores work? That stuff doesn't just appear on the shelves. The company that makes the bread buys that space. And the space that's right here at eye level is more expensive than the space that's down by your feet. Right? Because who the hell's looking down at their feet for bread? Right? Bookstore, same way. So they buy space at the bookstore. And for about 6 months, my book was right there. I have pictures to prove it. They're at Barnes & Noble on the shelf. But that cost me money. Now, luckily, I sold enough of this book that I came out ahead. But that was expensive. It was a costly process. Okay? The rest of these, I have published, self-published, a lot with Denise's help, and some other people who are more expert at this, basically for free, but they don't end up at Barnes & Noble, because I'm not going to spend $1,000 to get it on a shelf. It's not worth that to me. When I can do it on Amazon for free. And Barnes & Noble has a similar platform and program too, a little bit more complicated. But, so, you know, independent publishing now has been a blessing for many, many people just like us.
I think what sometimes people forget is that publishing is a business. You know, people think that, oh, you know, an agent likes my book. And being published is not validation as a writer. It means you have written something, an agent and a publisher thinks they can sell and make money. And that's a real important distinction. You know, if you're looking for creative affirmation, you should enroll in, you know, FFA program, you know, or read it to your spouse, or, but it is a business. That they're in the business of selling books. That's a business. Same thing. You know, if you created a tire design, Pep Boys isn't going to necessarily buy it if it's not going to work on, you know, I mean, you know, on vehicles and things. So it isn't kind of, so it's not a personal thing. So that's something to keep in mind. And we've all read books. It's like, how did this get it? Because they knew they could sell it. Well, it was the worst book I ever read.
Anybody ever heard of Twilight?
So it was, you know, something that was considered saleable. And that's important to, and we're talking about, you know, how can we get the most, what can we do with this product and get the most money? And honestly, that's just good business, if you think about that. You know, if you have a product, you want to get that in the customer's hands. So that being said, we never discourage anybody from going a traditional route if you understand this is business. You know, there's all kinds of things online. Authors will tell you they have no control, generally over the final edits. They have no control over what the cover is going to look like. They are expected to promote too. You know, you have to do those things. If you get in advance, you could go to events and not ever get paid for it. So say, you know, you sold a book for $6,000, you have to earn that out before you'll ever see any royalties. So those are, it's a business. If you don't earn it out, you don't have to pay it back. Up until about 10 years ago, except for a small company called Lulu, which is still around, it's in North Carolina, if you had one of two things, you had to find an agent or a publisher who would accept your book, or you would have to spend thousands of dollars to get a company to put it together. And a lot of those companies, the quality of the product was not very good. I had held those books as a journalist, interviewing local authors. The editing was terrible, the formatting was terrible, the pages were falling out.